Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is Thursday, November 17th, 2022, and we are kicking off our 71st series of episodes, as we always do with the current feature. And this time, we are back to a Marvel film with Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts for the evening. I'm in Los Angeles now for a brief bit, but I'll be back in New York City next week. As a lot of you know, we are doing all these screenplay readings, and we just did Mrs. Miniver in New York. I'm back in LA for a quick job, and then back to New York in December to do the final reading of the year of The Magnificent Ambersons. So it's been a very, very busy year. So tonight, with our 71st series episodes, current feature, we are reviewing our 6th MCU film. We did the Avengers Age of Ultron in episode 8. In episode 49.1, we did Ant-Man and the Wasp. In episode 54.1, we did the Avengers Endgame. In episode 65.1, we did Black Widow. In episode 68.1, we did Spider-Man. And so this would be our 6th one. And that does not include the Fantastic Four review we did back in episode 15.1, the film with Miles Teller, which is a Marvel property, but not officially a part of the MCU. Let's see who's going to be doing tonight's review with me, doing his second show ever, ladies and gentlemen, and his first current feature, the Prince of the No Name Cinema Society, Angelo Santos, is with us.
You see that?
There you go. We got a little piece of event. There it is. Returning for a guest appearance after doing charity work on some random island with his surprise child, Zach Domingo is back.
Wakanda forever.
All right. Excellent, guys. So, and of course, I met both of these guys on the same feature that we all worked on back in Maryland in 2018. Is that right, guys?
2018.
All right. So these guys know each other, even though this is their first show together. As I mentioned, this is our 71st series of episodes, and this is our schedule for this set episode, starting tonight with Wakanda Forever. On Monday, Kelly and Mel will be with me as we do our indie spotlight for the Florida Project from director Sean Baker. Special Wednesday episode, the day before Thanksgiving, November 23rd, we will be doing our classic movie discussion of Goldfinger, the James Bond film. On Monday, November 28th, will be our 55th Sound Off. Angela will be back. We'll have an end-of-year announcement. Angela will be involved in the recastings of films from 1986, along with Kelly, and we'll be counting down our top 5 Florida films of all time. That was our schedule for this, our 71st series of episodes. Now it's time to see who's drinking what. And I've got, I usually do the IPAs, and I've got Voodoo Ranger who's on sale today. Usually do maybe Goose Island or something like that, but I got Voodoo Ranger. Let's see if these guys are drinking with me. Zach usually does, but maybe not today. Zach, Angela, you guys drinking with me today?
Just water.
Just
stay hydrated.
It's a black thermos. You can pretend there's anything inside. Just say there's whiskey in there. Scotch.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Angela, you with me?
I got some vodka. I'm going to pour some cranberry in here.
Oh, nice. All right. Very cool. This is our drinking slide. These are the things that you guys, the fans, drink to whenever we do them on the show. Anytime I say contrivance, contrived, all-time, diegesis of verisimilitude, you drink. And anytime Zach says, for real, real talk, 100%, or claims there's a hill he doesn't want to die on, those are the times that you drink on the show. Nothing for Angelo yet. This is only his second show. So we'll see if Zach or I trigger you guys to drink something.
I'm sure will.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the summary. Wakanda Forever. As Wakanda mourns the loss of their king, T'Challa, the resource that made them special, vibranium, is discovered in the Atlantic Ocean, which reveals the existence of a whole other subterranean secret world, full of a community that has all the same advantages of Wakanda. Queen Ramonda and Princess Shuri must determine whether these new blue-skinned people are potential friends or potential foes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for opening thoughts, which is basically their feelings on the film in one sentence or less. One of the big films of the fall here. Zach, you're the veteran, believe it or not, so you get to go first. One sentence or less, how'd you feel about Black Panther: Wakanda Forever?
Wakanda forever.
Angelo.
I would say it's not The Empire Strikes Back.
They both have some vaguish, but you get the sense of whether they liked it or not, with their opening thoughts. My opening thought was really quite good until it wasn't. and we'll dig into that, you know, a little bit for me. Starting with the positive, however, as we usually do, I'm going to start with direction. And on the Oscar preview in 2018, I named Ryan Coogler as the best director of that year for his work on the first Black Panther. And his skill and adeptness at storytelling is on high display once again. He has a natural flair for action scenes, which are simultaneously exciting and visually stimulating. He manages to tonally find a balance between meeting the needs of the MCU and also exploring cultural and political themes. And finally, we'll dig into this more in a second, but nearly all of the actors are very good, which, as we've stated in the past, suggests a steady hand at the helm. One only needs to look at Creed 1 and Creed 2 to see the difference a good director makes. It has often been suggested that Marvel films are director-proof, and that may be true of the Russo brothers and John Watts, but I submit that what Ryan Coogler brings to the table is something far more interesting, far more special. Angelo, anything on Ryan Coogler's work?
I mostly agree with you on that. Yeah, the acting was pretty good, especially from the actors we didn't or we don't or we're not familiar with, particularly Namor and that tribe. Or I always feel like Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character's out of place, but she didn't feel out of place in this film too. So I felt like probably his direction probably kind of made her fit in a little bit more. The fight scenes didn't seem as intense. I didn't feel as involved in them than they did in the first one. Mainly talking about, especially the one on the bridge. For some reason, it seemed a little off. The rest of the action scenes, especially between Namor and Shuri, were awesome. And then the action scenes in Wakanda also, and then in the sub at the end, I think were pretty good.
Without giving too much away, I did think the end stood out as being excellent. The climax of the film earned its place as the climax from an action point of view and also from a visuals point of view. Like, the action was not only interesting and exciting, but also visually compelling frequently. And that's one of the things that I liked about it. I have some story issues, which I'll get to, but I do think a lot of that action was pretty good. Zach, anything on the action or the direction?
Direction? Not really. I mean, like what you said, I feel like the general idea or known thing for most of these movies at this point is that it's all kind of churned out through the Marvel machine. So director doesn't have as much influence in these movies as, say, in something that's not part of the Marvel franchise.
I addressed that a little bit in my notes, and you were on the Black Widow show, and we talked about that extensively, and I think that's particularly true with sort of a newer director. I don't remember that director's name of Black Widow. It was a female director. I do think that both the Black Panther films, they feel different to me. I agree with you. Generally speaking, I do think that Ryan Coogler might be the exception.
I would agree with that statement.
Given what he's done and the success of Black Panther and its importance from a cultural point of view, Ryan Coogler maybe is given a little more leeway.
That makes sense. I definitely tend to care about the Black Panther movies more than most of the other Marvel Universe movies. In terms of action, I personally have reached a point where these movies just happen to me. I don't place as much of a critical eye to these movies as much as I do to most other things.
You each said something different that sort of made me realize I'm going to disagree with Angela a little bit, in the sense that whenever we do see things outside of the immediate Black Panther universe, the immediate Wakanda universe, meaning Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character of Valentina, S.H.I.E.L.D. or whatever, that's when the movie feels like more Marvel created. I feel less of Ryan Coogler. Maybe Ryan Coogler isn't as involved, or maybe he cares less about those scenes, potentially. So I do feel that at places in this movie, and then there's places where the Black Panther universe feels almost separate from the Marvel machine. I see what you're saying, certainly in a lot of different places. Angelo, any further rebuttal on that?
I don't know if it's a rebuttal, but I found it interesting. It's where I kind of had Zach's sentiment with all the other movies where I didn't have a cinema lens until I watched Black Panther, the original one. You commented earlier about the social commentary of Ryan Coogler's films, and I felt Black Panther did that. That's why I think it was so well received and just so different for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the one that came out, because Black Panther, the original came out in 2018, but in 2019, my number 2 film of 2019, and I'm curious, like, this might be a sidebar, but I'm curious what Zach thinks about this. I thought Captain Marvel accomplished both those things, both the entertainment value and the social commentary.
I agree with everything Angelo said. As for the comparison between Captain Marvel and Black Panther, that's a non-comparison to me. Can't tell you a single thing I remember about that movie I think they used a lot of '90s music, right? Was that?
It took place in the '90s, so
Yeah.
that would make sense.
Hooray! That's Black Panther did make me care, which a lot of these movies have often failed to do.
Moving on to the next section, we talked. We dipped our toe in this a little bit when talking about direction, performances, and as I said, I feel like the performances were almost all good. Though in a normal year, none of them would stand out as potentially Oscar worthy to me. With that said, I haven't seen many things I've liked this year, so I might wind up shortlisting Angela Bassett in the supporting category. She has a couple of high-octane power moments that are memorable. She handles them nicely. I don't know if I'd consider it a next-level outstanding performance, but if you force me to name 5 right now, she'd likely make the list. Angela Bassett.
I'm a little biased because I love Angela Bassett. What I loved about Angela Bassett in here is that it felt like she was actually used to her full potential as an actress. I think the character gives her the opportunity to be that powerful as she can be. She kind of eats up all those scenes that she's in that could hopefully land her an Oscar nomination.
Zach, anything on Angela Bassett?
She's great, and I think isn't she always great? Is there standout dad Angela Bassett?
I'm sure I could find something, like not to knock Angela Bassett, but if I really dug in, I'm sure I could find that movie that she took just to get the new car.
Like, you gotta dig, you know what I mean? You gotta
Critters 3.
Absolutely.
She was in Critters 3. She was in Critters 3 or something. She was one of the Critters movies. It's one of her first roles.
I bet she was the best person in that movie.
Next up, Letitia Wright. I find her immensely likable, at ease in her role. Her character is the one with the arc, and she navigates it nicely within the parameters of her script. I think she finds the balance between humor and pathos with ease, which is a tricky line to walk. Zach.
She was great too. I mean, I like her a lot in the first one, but I mean, really, the movie was like about her emotional arc.
Feels like this is her movie.
Absolutely.
Angelo, anything on Letitia Wright?
She stepped up to the plate. She knocked it out of the park.
Angelo mentioned this a little bit before. I'm going to have a trouble with his name potentially, but I also even like the newcomer, Tenoch Huerta Mejia. He has a big scene in the middle of the film, which has a lot of resonance. I tell my students that you always want to understand your antagonists, your villains. And this actor certainly portrayed his character with an empathy that I shared to a certain degree. So I really appreciate Tenoch's work here.
I think you used the right word, is empathy, where it's hard because his character is an anti-hero. So he has to walk that line between being hated and then being liked. Kind of understood. He's the leader of this sort of an indigenous people where they're being invaded, and then you kind of have to walk that fine line on retaliate or when to negotiate. And
don't start dipping into the T word. We'll get to all that in the T word.
Okay. It's like I've never seen him in anything. I've never heard his name. So it was a good, nice surprise and refreshing.
Zach, Tenoch.
Yeah, I thought he was great. I don't really have a whole lot to add. I mean, I think, you guys are both right on the nose. He made me care and not hate him. And part of that's, I'm sure, the writing as well, but he didn't do the typical like Bond villain, like, no redeemable qualities and just an awful person. You see nice moments of humanity in there.
I keep saying I liked almost all the performances. And that brings me to Dominique Thorne. The only performance that didn't quite work for me, she plays the young scientist in the film, and she felt extremely awkward to me in a way that young, lesser-trained actors often are, not quite comfortable in their performing skin. There was almost a lack of commitment to her choices. It almost felt like she needed a few more rehearsals, maybe a few more takes to really gain the confidence. Some actors, like Letitia Wright, perhaps in the first film, take to the format naturally. Others need a little more time. She bumped for me. Zach, Dominique Thorne.
Yeah, I agree. That's the one that stuck out. I'm just like with it, and then anytime she has a lot of screen time, it felt awkward. I felt like I was in a rehearsal.
You get the bingo sign for that rehearsal comment. It's pretty much how I felt. When you are as brilliant as that or as smart as that, it affects the way that you carry yourself or other aspects of your life. And it didn't feel like she incorporated that level of backstory into the performance.
She didn't feel like a real fleshed out character.
Let's see if Angelo disagrees.
I will not disagree. So I will somewhat agree, but I think it could be tied to maybe the writing or the story.
I might agree with you, but then again, Letitia Wright also plays a super smart, scientific character, and I buy it. And in the first film, she's about the same age. You can totally A/B the situation, and
right. But I think But it's also what you talk about backstory, where at least Shuri's characters grew up sort of in this industrialized, world where science was important, and Riri grew up lower class. She had to rise up to get to where she is at MIT. I see where you're going, where it's like she didn't play smart correctly, I think.
There seems like there's elements that you also didn't buy. It's like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I'm sort of sensing. You're a little more forgiving, but it sounds like you saw some of what Zach and I are saying.
Yeah.
That will bring me to screenplay, which brings me to my primary quibbles. And I got to dance around this because I don't want to give too much away. There's a certain moment toward the end of Act 2 that I just did not buy. And so, like the old saying goes, this film sort of jumped the shark for me. And I was still impressed with the visuals, but story-wise, I was not on board anymore. And it feels to me like the screenwriters wrote themselves into the proverbial corner, and the rest of the film went off the rails after that, for me. With their backs against the wall, our heroes are given an unnecessary and tactically ridiculous reprieve. Nothing in the setup of the character or the antagonist made that seem plausible to me, which to me goes to show that the writers were stuck. And it's a shameful contrivance because there was somewhere the writers wanted to go and didn't know how to get there. And it unnecessarily elongates the film. The same events could have transpired during their reprieve, but it could have happened sooner. So much of the last half of the film could have been consolidated, and honestly, another pass at the draft might have allowed them to make that realization. But the deadlines of these big budget tentpoles are sometimes not conducive to that extra time.
I don't feel like I had a lot of bumps in the story personally. I guess the emotional aspects is more important to me, and that's the stuff that I actually was surprised that I cared about. Because, to be honest, in general, like, obviously Wakanda Forever is a lot more contained than a lot of other Marvel movies. I give it a lot of leeway, but when it came to the emotional plot lines, like, that was when I was actually engaged.
You think about the passing of Chadwick Boseman gave this particular film a lot of additional weight. I mean, weight that I'm sure they would have traded to have him back. It's, sad and unfortunate, but you can't help but feel his loss and the resonance of his legacy as a part of this film. And the whole opening sort of speaks to that. Dramatically and emotionally, it certainly works, from that point of view. Angelo, anything about my bump or any of your own bumps?
I think the bumps for me is come back to what we were talking about, where the Marvel part comes in.
Do you feel like their attempts to connect it to the rest of the MCU feel desperate?
A little bit, yeah. I also felt like with other characters they're trying to build up for the Marvel universe, were they necessary? Yeah,
well, and then also the flip side too, if you want, I haven't watched all the television shows, but I did watch the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It works in reverse too. Wakanda sort of inserted into that TV show almost in an uncomfortable way. Anything like the bump that I was referring to?
The bump you're referring to, let me think about it. I could see, now that you said it, yes.
Okay, I'll take that. Along the same lines, I do think the script's occasional attempts at humor seem a little undercooked. In other words, the jokes weren't that good. Not that they tried frequently for jokes, but when they did, it often fell flat. The result of both of these things is a film with so much good that fell short to me of being truly satisfying. Probably more so because it was close, and so these things that I perceive as mistakes seem magnified. Definitely I didn't like it as much as the first one for these reasons.
I can think of two pretty good little jokes. Did none of it work for you?
Some of the stuff involving the young scientist character, that whole attempt at humor during that section didn't seem to work for me at all.
It's probably in part because of the relationships between the characters, where the first one, you understood that T'Challa and Shuri are brother and sister, and you always expect that banter, right, between siblings, where here she's emotionally sad, so she can't really bounce off humor off of, but
That's a really good point. Like, so much heaviness hanging over the film that, like, maybe the attempts at jokes were also kind of desperate. Like, we need some humor, and maybe they felt they needed to inject it and didn't quite come as natural. So I think this next section might be one of Zach's favorite sections. Zach, do you know what's coming up?
Are you going to say the T word?
It is the T-word! This is where we talk about the themes of the film. The founder of the show, Drunk Davey, did not like talking about themes. He thought it was too much like homework. And so whenever we wanted to talk about themes, we just called it the T-word, and now a segment was born. A lot of times with the other Marvel films, we had really stretched to talk about the T-word a little bit. Not so in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. When Black Panther made my top 10 of 2018, I talked a little bit about the theme of globalism. In spite of its cultural impact, I felt that both this film and the previous film was less about race relations directly and more about globalism, how the sharing of ideas and resources could help disadvantaged all over. The film asked, what was Wakanda's responsibility to the rest of the world? This film is about that too, but examines the dark side of that same concept, leaning into the question about resources specifically. It paints the rest of the world as bratty children who were given a taste of the ice cream and now feel like they are owed the whole carton. Does the sharing that T'Challa started make his people more vulnerable because they are suddenly less special than they were before? The introduction of a whole new secret race of people complicates that even further. I was disappointed at the portrayal of the other world powers, but probably because it felt so plausible. The first film was a call to arms, to share. While this film doesn't take that back completely, it reminds us that it's not that simple. Angelo, anything on globalism?
I'm kind of agree with you where because of the fictional richness and value of
Vibranium.
Vibranium, thank you. So it touches on colonialism, indigenous kind of peoples of other lands and what the Western world has taken from them in order to give us how we live, really, you know? And yeah, and then what are the consequences of that? Obviously,
a lot of what's behind that colonialism is the resources, right?
Resources.
Like, but in old days, it was oil or gold. Or the Holy Grail, even, you know, in the religious crusades, you know, age-old story you hear time and time again. Zach, globalism.
I'm just happy that they were willing to kind of touch on that. An entire franchise that doesn't generally do anything like that. You know what I mean?
Cool. So my other theme is less successful in the film, but might have been the film's primary focus, at least in terms of character development, and that is the theme of leadership. There's a lot of discussion about what makes a great leader. One character spouts the line, broken people make the best leaders, as if that's the main idea of an essay, but I never saw any evidence in the film to support that. Angelo talked a little bit about this idea of the old Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X debate. Are leaders meant to be patient, thoughtful, and diplomatic, or are they supposed to be people of action, stopping at nothing to protect their subjects and interests? Or is there a happy medium? One of the reasons I feel like this was less successful in this film is because it feels a tad bit forced in the script, and I'm not sure the final character transition was quite earned. Like I said, it's another age-old debate that is as relevant now as it was in the 60s, but this film didn't quite land it as well for my money. But to Zach's point, it's interesting that it's on its mind.
I didn't think this was a theme until now, JB, to be honest with you. But now that you brought it up, I kind of want to address now it's like, oh, wait, you know, this movie kind of addressed sort of the different kinds of leaders.
It felt like it affected a lot of the characters, the idea of leadership. Queen,
right. But there's also well, that's one thing. There's like you have, you know, royalty within Wakanda, but then, you know, I guess democracy, I guess, was named or elected, or it seemed like he was an elected official, right? So that's almost like the democracy of that civilization. And then, of course, the leaders we have that we know of the Western world, which kind of ties into what the globalization theme also. You kind of question, you have to question what makes a good leader, and then you kind of question like the leaders you're under right now. It's like, who's the good leader, you know?
It's discussed, you know, like on the nose a little bit sometimes in the film. Like there's actually like conversation about it. So Zach has a theme that he wanted to add.
Yeah, I mean, loss and legacy, what your place within all of that is. I mean, I felt like from the very get-go, that's what one of the main problems was, or conflicts was, for a lot of these characters, is like, what do we do after losing the Black Panther?
Would you make an extension of that? Grief?
Grief, yeah. I think grief is a huge part of it.
Talk about something that affects all the characters. Namor has had loss. To him, his trauma outweighs the trauma of the Wakandans. In a way, sort of ties back to leadership. Angelo, anything for you about loss, grief, legacy?
I think maybe the loss kind of will define your legacy. It has a part in your legacy.
Your legacy is valued in this culture. There is this passing down of the torch that's a part of the culture. Does that same legacy of the culture make sense in the modern world? It almost felt like that was a question as well. Should they reevaluate some of those traditions now that they are not as separated from the rest of the world as they were prior to the first film? So some interesting things to think about there. A very in-depth discussion. I'm about to close things out, so that gives us the opportunity to give these guys closing thoughts. Angelo or Zach, anything you guys want to say that we didn't get to talk about?
Not really. I mean, I think we touched on everything. You know, we touched a little bit on how they were kind of having to make a movie out of an impossible task, and I think they did a pretty good job of that. Oh, I liked it. It was worth watching. I don't regret watching it.
Angelo.
Closing thoughts. I'll probably follow up on my not Empire Strikes Back idea or thought from the beginning.
It's like bookends.
And I feel like now that I said it in the beginning, I feel like I should take it back because I feel it might be a little unjustified given what they had to work with, which is the death of their lead character. From what happened to them, I felt they handled it well. Very well, actually.
This will be our last set of episodes for the year, so we don't have another current feature probably for another year because we got a lot going on at the beginning of 2023. So, we'll be back potentially next November with a new current feature. We do have a show to close out our 8th season and our 71st series of episodes. We continue with our Indie Spotlight this Monday night, the 21st, with a film that made 2 top 10s of 2017, The Florida Project from director Sean Baker. And that's coming up with Mel and Kelly this upcoming Monday night. All right, guys, say goodbye to the audience.
Bye, audience.
All right, Angelo's not, he's just ignoring the audience. He doesn't care about you, apparently. Just staring there. Wakanda forever. Don't forget, there's the audio listening audience too. There's people just listening to us on Spotify, so they won't see your Wakanda forever sign.
Sorry.
Anyway, just take my word for it, audience, that he did that if you're just listening. With that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.